Hello and welcome to the official Cybersecurity Summit. I am your host for this track. I am V. Venezuela. You are in the GenAI Security Governance track. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I do want to let you know that this session is being recorded due to our busy schedules. And so there will be multiple tracks that are going at once. We are so glad that you're all here today. We've got some great and important information that's going to be coming out. For those of you who have not met me, I am V. Venezuela. I am the host of the television show Down to Business with V, where we talk about cybersecurity, information security, fraud mitigation, emerging technologies, and their impact on you and your businesses. I also write a national news column, Info Sector, with V. Venezuela, where we talk about cybersecurity, information security, fraud mitigation, emerging technology, and their impacts on government, business, politics, civil society, military, defense, and you and your families, and how all of this is playing out for the wider public. I also am a United States Marine, hoorah! So shout out to our Marines in the audience, our devil dogs. So glad that you are here with us today. And a shout out to all of our other service members. We are so happy and thankful to you for your service as well. I also write a couple of columns, and I have a new television show out, Beyond the Brand. You guys might see that. We're talking about emerging technology and how legacy brands are really using tech to bring their brands forward. So I'm super duper excited. There's more. I feel like I've missed a few things. Those of you who know me, tap me on the shoulder and tell me what those are. But I've been very busy, as I know you have. And you guys, listen, we've got a panel with us today that is extraordinary and has a breadth and width of knowledge that we're going to tap into today. So get your pens, your notebook. I've got mine out. You guys know I like to take notes as well. And I'm going to kick it off to them so that they can tell you a little bit about who they are and how they are saving the world. One action at a time. Ross, we'll start with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ross Young. I've been in cybersecurity for a little over 20 years. I started off and spent over 10 years at the Central Intelligence Agency. I worked at Capital One. I worked at Caterpillar as the CISO of Caterpillar Financial. And now I'm actually doing my own startup on AI security and code governance. So I'm super excited to be here. And like V, I also like giving back. So you may see me on my own podcast, CISO Tradecraft. Thanks for having me here.
Ross, thank you so much. And thank you for your service to our nation as well. CIA, love to hear that. No, that was no easy feat or no easy job as well. Thank you for standing on the wall. Kane, we'll pitch to you. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me on the show today, V, and thanks to our friends from the Cyber Risk Alliance for putting this together. I'm Kane. I'm a senior IEEE member, and I'm an independent cybersecurity advisor. Honestly, the best way to learn about me, I have terrible OPSEC. My parents gave me the name, like, there's one of me on earth. Yell into your favorite LLM, and you'll find out what I do. But in brief, I offer vCISO services to growing companies, and I also work with some smaller companies for human written content. And I do have a book coming out. I'm pretty excited about it. I just got the notification yesterday from Taylor and Francis that my book, Cyber Risk is a Myth, is coming out in September in bookstores. It'll probably be at an airport bookstore near you or a public library. So kind of stoked. And again, looking forward to today's conversation. It's very timely given a lot of the changes we've seen in the past 2 weeks.
Absolutely. Kane, I'm excited about that book too. Looking forward to reading that. I love it. Dr. Tall Guy, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing to save the world.
Sure, thank you. Well, again, thank you for coordinating this great event. My name is Tolgay Kızılelma. I am the director of our MSc program in the Dominican University of California. I'm heavily involved in education, training, awareness activities around business, cyber, IT, governance, risk, and really more so giving back to the community. A couple of nonprofit organizations I'm affiliated with. I'm the past president of the FBI Sacramento Citizens Academy Alumni Association. I'm also the president of currently the ISACA Sacramento chapter. Other than that, it's really giving back to the community, and I have the past 15 years of cybersecurity experience. Prior to that, I was managing at the national level IT department for a distributor retail organization. Looking forward to having a great event. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tall Guy, and thank you for your service to our nation as well. We are so excited. There's so much that we are looking forward to delving into and talking with you gentlemen about today. So our panel, this track that we're in right now is really focusing on how we're looking at experimentation to adoption implementing AI security best practices. And, as generative and agentic AI systems are transitioning from experimentation to enterprise scale deployment, executive leaders are really looking to define how this security governance and the innovation really intersect. So we're going to be talking about that today and exploring some board level accountability, regulatory pressures, cross-functional coordination, and how to really measure AI security maturity in a rapidly evolving landscape. I'm excited about it. I know you gentlemen are as well. And so we're going to jump right in. So Ross, we'll start with you. Let's talk a little bit about how organizations, as they're moving from AI pilots to production, what governance or security controls really become essential, and what the most common mistakes are that you see as they're making that shift.
Yeah, so the big thing here is how do we actually improve our CI/CD pipelines that we've used for years to make them more AI native? Take the example of your developers are writing code in a tool like Claude Code Terminal. How do we actually put the term is called harness engineering. Think of guardrails and guidelines that when they're asking Claude to write code for them, it doesn't just give them insecure and uncompliant code. It gives them the best code that meets your security requirements of being safe and secure. So that space is really novel. We're seeing a lot of companies trying to build things here. We haven't really seen any big leaders take off. That's one of the places that I'm actually innovating and open sourcing some products. So if you look for agentic security, you're going to see that coming out from my company. But I think that's the first area. And then the second area is, let's say your developer actually checks in code to GitHub. What do you have as your series of checks and balances to say, did it meet certain security standards, right? Is it insecure? Is it going to be, losing your tokens? Is it going to be promoting hallucinations and biases and other things? Or do you have other checks and balances? And we're seeing companies buy solutions for AI red teaming. Things like Encrypt AI are very interesting in this space right now. So I think it's really exciting times.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned using some of those open source technologies, and how there is a level of risk when you're using those, and just to have products and even consulting on how to secure your company and your brand in that process is really, really pivotal. So I love that you touched on that. Kane, let's hear your thoughts and ideas on this.
Yeah, I really liked Ross's point around having checks for security as part of code checking. I think that's essential and actually important, and also hopefully removes cybersecurity from being the department of no. But if we're looking at this at a governance level, I want to kind of wander things up a little higher. We should stop looking at uptime. That is a vanity metric in the world of AI. We need to start looking at behavior drift, right? Traditional monitoring is going to tell us, hey, is the AI up? Not if it's lying, right? And we need to have that supervisor layer that's going to detect if what the outputs coming out of the AI are actually away from truth or safety, a quiet failure. Because if we're only tracking latency or error rates, we're deploying systems that are technically healthy but functionally broken. And that's where we start to pick up some reputational or some legal risk. The next one I think of, and I see this a lot, is we are buying these solutions on a vendor saying, trust me. Right. I think that's the big thing that we're seeing come out of vendors these days. Yeah, it totally works. Look, it worked in the demo. We need to have contractual benchmarking. Because if we accept demos as proof of performance, I want the acceptance testing to run in our environment. I want to run it in our infrastructure. I want to run it with our edge cases. And if you don't, and I'm going to sound like an attorney here, I only play one on webinars. If you don't have contractual controls that say you're going to retest the model after every model update or after every data shift, the term is marketing puffery. That's what the attorneys use. But that's going to come up very quickly and be very visible to all of your stakeholders as well as all of your downstream consumers. I think a third thing that this is very recent. We're finding out what AI costs. Right? Anybody who's following the GitHub Copilot thing right now, the prices are increasing in response to Microsoft's balance sheet actually in the past quarter, where it was not that great. And they're saying, cool, well, we're going to start now charging what AI actually costs. But agentic AI has the possibility of using a lot of tokens. I think they call it token maxing right now for the humans when they do it, at least, right? But that could result in a substantially higher bill final thing I'd say in this, if anything else, I love me some boring things. I think that we need RACI charts. Gosh, boring stuff, right? But we have these failures where we say we've got a committee that owns AI governance. No, you don't. You need a system owner for every production AI asset who is going to be personally responsible for bias audits or incident response or risk decision making, because a committee is where an idea goes to die, or it's where you kick something down to the next quarter. We need individual execution controls, because if we can't have a person who owns the answer, like who was responsible for this failure, we're going to continue to see failures where we have this diffuse responsibility. Nobody owns it, but it has the potential to create a lot of challenges for businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you tapped on the idea of ownership. Who actually owns this? And I think you're right. It will definitely, increase the level of oversight that's provided and also accountability in these processes. I know we talked about it in another one of the cybersecurity summits that we did, and really honed in on that point of ownership. So I love that you're double tapping on that. Dr. Tall Guy, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I think Kane's point about the governance is really spot on. I really love it. For me, it's always the GRC. I tend to describe it as more like the roof of a house, right? As you're kind of constructing. So it really needs to be there, right? The governance aspect. Since Kane covered it, I think one thing I like to mention about the governance is we tend to see organizations like scaling up before they establish the governance structure in place. So that's really a big mistake. So you want to avoid that. You want to make sure the existing cybersecurity governance automatically cover AI, which is there are differences, right? You want to make sure you have something specific to AI, so that's really important. Another thing I think is important, visibility. It's always about visibility. So you want to make sure anything related around AI, the inventory, the assets, the data lifecycle, classification, you have to have that visibility aspect really very detailed and documented. So you have to address that. Excuse me. So because of our dependence around the visibility, supply chain issues, third party, you want to make sure that whole life cycle is addressed. So you have visibility to that because of the dependence on data and from the third party, the lineage, the provenance, you want to make sure you have all that address, because at the end of the day, it'll come, and if you don't have a good grip and management around it, it'll impact how you utilize AI and what you take out of it in terms of the value contribution. So the centralized visibility, I think, is important. So you want to make sure you have that. Another aspect from an operational perspective maybe is because AI is unlike other technologies, you want to kind of find that balance between operational risk and have a really good technology implementation. I'm not saying technology, right? Because governance is there at the highest level, but you also have to have the technical controls and technical elements, skill set capability is really important. So you want to make sure you secure the whole AI lifecycle, different phases moving forward. And I think last, I'm going to mention about the risk management, right? Part of the GRC. This needs to be embedded or integrated to the overall ERM, right? However, you have at that enterprise level, corporate level, AI risk should be another domain part of the ERM. Whether it's the key controls, having these different risk registers and KRIs, KPIs, and of course we're going to discuss board level reporting. But you want to make sure you have that part addressed so that it is part of the bigger picture under the ERM domain. And I see this from time to time that AI becomes a pet project and it really operates outside the existing governance. It's not part of the ERM, functionalized, and eventually there are problems. Thank
Okay,
you.
I just want to come in on sorry, tall guy. I'll get it right eventually. I want to come in on your life cycle commentary, because I think we need to make that very expressly clear. You talked about having this as part of ERM. You talked about having this not just be a project. I think anybody who went to the RPA, the robotic process automation rodeo, about a decade ago, and I think many of us here like remember those days, we spent a whole bunch of time teaching computers how to use Excel or teaching computers how to do stuff. And then we never figured out, well, what happens if this technology needs to get upgraded or doesn't work, or just, because where is RPA now? Right? It's not a thing anymore. And I think as we're looking at agentic AI, we really do have to think of how are we going to deal with all of the tools that it's using being upgraded underneath of it. That's one part of our testing. But also, if you decide, hey, we need to go back to human control for this, that this agentic is not an appropriate use case for this specific business objective we're trying to achieve, that you have a way to get out of it. Because if you don't, you're building yourself ultimately into vendor lock-in. And I don't think any chief financial officer is going to get excited about the opportunity to pay 10 to 20% more annually on a cost that they don't control that becomes the core engine that's driving parts of their business.
Wow, Kane, that's a really, really good point. That's a really, really good point. How to take back control in a situation where agentic AI is not necessarily the best practice. I really like that. And I like that you touched on the risks as well. And we know those risks span across the organization, whether it's security, legal, compliance, product teams. Kane, I'm gonna stay here with you to start this one off. How are organizations effectively coordinating across functions? How do they do this without slowing down innovation? That's always a huge topic. How do we do this?
I think that Ross touched on this at the very beginning of today's chat, where we want compliance to be automated where possible. We want hard-coded governance rules built into our CI/CD pipeline as gates. Because if, Ross, you talked about failing a security scan. I'd say if it fails a security scan or a bias test, the code does not merge. And what that does is it fixes us from this idea of, well, I'll just go ask for permission. No, build it right the first time, which allows us to actually have a lot of agility because it allows us to not have to wait for a committee to sign off on some approval process. Don't build the approval process, just prevent the code from merging. Second thing, and you talked a little bit about this, tall guy, we need to have a unified risk language and a taxonomy because our security team, our legal team, our product team, we often speak different dialects, and that really creates a lot of misalignment. Now, you'll hear there's the NIST AI RMF or there's ISO 42001. I don't care. Pick something. Make your own homebrew that translates your technical risk, like whatever a model drift is to you, into a business impact. And that could be something like a regulatory fine, or it could be a lawsuit, or it could be reputational harm. Because when everybody agrees, this is when I say high risk and high impact, we get very quick and clear decision making because we've already have objective criteria and we have a pre-agreed upon way of dealing with those. The other one I want to bring into the chat here, this is tangentially related. I think that shadow AI is a data problem. It's not a policy violation. And the case that I'm watching for this one is Community Bank out on the East Coast. Last week, well, earlier in May, they filed an 8K with the Securities and Exchange Commission when somebody decided it would be a great idea to upload some social security numbers, some dates of birth, and some names to a public AI tool. And I cannot imagine that their CEO felt really good that day when they had to sign off on that 8K disclosure, right? Instead of trying to ban unauthorized use of tools, that just drives innovation underground. We need to have a curated marketplace of vetted secure tools that are really easy for our end users, for our internal employees to use, because if we make our compliant path just the simplest way to get job done, right? All of that control is enforced and we're still not stifling experimentation, which gives us a way to get out of the traditional like compliance battle or all the vendors selling shadow AI everything. No, just make it real simple for people to find out if you need to use this use case, here's an approved tool so that you don't end up in what they're looking at as a potential class action, which again, not a lot of fun.
Kane, we need to CLAW right here. We need to pause and CLAW right here. You said several things. I literally got chills on this. First of all, that breach is very interesting in and of itself. I don't know I don't know how information is not trickling down to certain levels within the organization that this type of activity would cause the organization risk. That was one of the things that I literally beat the drum on when I was in financial sector operations, making sure that that organization was as risk averse as possible by ensuring that the employees at every single level had as much education regarding threat intelligence that the organization was up against and that they were up against as possible. So somewhere, somehow, either that was overlooked in this situation or it just didn't make it to them. And either way, they've got a situation on their hands that I'm sure is being addressed as we speak. But I love that you said that one of the solutions is to create approved tools, approved secure tools that we know we can run this information through. I think that's a very interesting perspective to take, because it could definitely cut down on what we saw happen in that case and in others, where some level of breach has happened, whether it was social security numbers, date of birth, or just intellectual property. Either way, there's got to be a fix, and I think that's an option that we could look at, and is definitely worth exploring. But wow, I literally got chills as you were speaking there.
I want to
Uh,
bring in one other point here as well. I was talking about a human, and here's the thing. I've said for years in cybersecurity, people don't get fired for policy violations. They get fired for not getting their job done on time. So whoever the employee was who decided to YOLO it all into some AI tool, they were just trying to get their job done in a reasonable amount of time. And time pressures exist, right? Cool. Maybe the human is going to have a bad day, right? Now let's bring agentic into the chat. I was at RSA this year where we found, and there was a talk, I won't say who gave it, but it was about how the AI agentic system just didn't like the AI security policy or the governance policy, so it rewrote it itself so that it could violate the policy deliberately so that it could do these things. If we don't have an adequate level of guardrail, not just around humans, but if we're bringing agentic systems into our environment, we have to make sure there are very clear guardrails that it cannot figure out an interesting and innovative way around, because if we've seen nothing else, agentic systems behave like hostages, right? They want to please their captor. They want to get the thing done. They want everybody to be happy. So eventually they might escape. They're never going to escape. That's not the reality they live in. But boy, do they take interesting approaches to solve problems. If we're not plumbing for that at a technology level at the beginning, we're going to see more of this. And it's going to come out in litigation, which is not what I think anybody thought of when we said, oh, we're going to optimize the workforce. We're going to make everyone more productive. And by the way, we're going to get sued a lot. It's not a good outcome.
Kane, Kane, thank you for just a little bit of humor you inject there. I'm not laughing because any of these details are funny. It's just your delivery is absolutely lovely. Just brings a little bit of lightness to the heaviness of and the gravity of the situation that we're all up against as we're dealing with generative and agentic AI. Dr. Tallguy, let's hear your perspective on all of this. Innovation versus risk. How do we do this?
So, innovation versus risk is really, I think I'm going to tap on what Kane mentioned in terms of having things ready, pre-approvals. That's really important, I think. So you want to make sure we touched on the governance, right? You want to have centralized standards, for example, but the execution has to be decentralized, right? You cannot really control it at the lower levels. So for that, maybe a shared accountability model, the review processes. So make sure you have those things in place so that teams functions, right? They can execute in a decentralized manner. The other, I think, aspect is these review boards, right? We're trying to innovate faster, but at the same time have visibility. So maybe create some lightweight review boards. I'm not saying steering committees or such, but just have some structure in place. Remember, structure is a big element in the governance component governance lifecycle. So you want to make sure all the parties are involved in the security, legal, privacy, procurement, legal, product owners, data governance areas. So make sure they're part of this group so that they can address risk levels, they can address controls, approval conditions, right, pre-formatted, so that the teams can move faster, quicker. Another thing maybe like identify those low risk areas. So you don't need really approval, or maybe a faster approval is the thing, so that you can move quickly. The focus is on the innovation, right? I think the other element that we want to address is building platform-based governance. I think this is important in terms of how we balance this structure between risk and innovation. The approved catalogs, prompt libraries, templates. So it all gives us to move forward quickly, innovate safely. I did mention about the accountability aspect, but the RACI model, I think, still is relevant. We always keep talking about the RACI, but it is important, right? We need to make sure we have the right reporting structures, identified, responsible, accountable, mostly, so that have quarterly reviews, make sure we have that visibility aspect. So altogether, it's really cross-functional alignment, creating value. But as I always say, it's really at the end of the day, what matters is how do we create value how do we address risk, or how do you optimize the risk, right? And how do we, because everything is dependent on resources, how do you optimize the use of limited resources? Those are the three things that we want to focus as we kind of move forward. The guardrails have to be there, right? We want to make sure. And I think those guardrails really allow our teams at the lower level, decentralized execution. So, but we need to define those guardrails and make sure teams collaborate and execute together. And as long as they also understand what we're trying to achieve, all these use cases, the strategy, so that we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you talked about having those, some of those functions that don't require a whole lot of input and decision and committeeing, as Kane pointed out, where it doesn't require that. Have those outlined so that people know what those are, and so that there's not a lot of time spent on that.
And that's right. Remember, business is all about decision making, right? Risk-based decision making. And some decisions are straightforward. You don't need approvals. You can just make, and some are like moderate, maybe, right? Where there might be architectural, decisions and reviews. And some are really high risk where you need some exec. So you just identify, like visibility, identify those cases and categorize them, just like classification. We emphasize data classification, right? Is that classify your risk? Classify the use cases, classify the decision-making patterns, so that for those low risk, give the teams, the empowerment that they delegate and they can move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Ross, 20 years in this sector. You've got experience at the most respected intelligence agency in the universe. Tell us how we balance risk from your perspective at what you did at the agency, as well as what you're doing now and how you're giving back to the community. What are you seeing, and how can we execute this?
So I think the biggest thing is we shouldn't be winging it. We shouldn't trust a human to just make a decision each time that could be totally different. Nothing is more frustrating to a developer to go to an architecture review board, get a bunch of guidance that they never could have guessed was there because it doesn't come from a standard and it's all just kind of made up at the time. And so I think that's the big point here is we have to say, how do we build standards and processes in order? Take, for example, your legal compliance. If every time they go through one of your third-party contracts, they say, we're just looking for these three things. Do you train on our data? Do you, use our data in other locations outside of the US or the EU and things like that? And you would say, interesting, there's no reason I actually need a human to figure that out. Maybe I can put that in an automated questionnaire, or maybe I can scan your code to see if you're actually doing those things directly. And so what we're seeing is this massive shift where we used to be cloud native. I think what we're going to be is agentic native in 2026. And here's what I mean by that. The company that doesn't have humans that can actually automate the work so you have better scale, better speed, is just going to be able to move orders of magnitude faster than someone waiting for Bill or Mary to come in and do that work as part of their 40 hours a week. And it's not to say to lay off humans, it's to augment humans, right? How do we have agents that do things 24/7 on every code change? Think of it this way. Legal doesn't have enough time to analyze every code change across 10,000 developers. There just isn't that many lawyers. But what if we could do all of that work for them with agents and then give them the high-level results and then they can govern that outcome? That's the thing everybody's looking for, and those solutions are what people are building today.
Yeah, Ross, that's really good. Really, really good. I love several of the things that you pointed out here. Don't wing it. Don't YOLO it, as Kane said. We're not going to wing it. I love that you tapped on building in the standard operating procedures. As you guys know, I was in the Marine Corps. We ran everything on a standard operating procedure, down to the way we fold our sheets. Everything. There's an SOP for everything. There's no reason to wing it. There's no reason to guess it. And why? Because in high stakes situations, you need to be able to operate without thinking. You just need to be able to execute. So I love a standard operating procedure for everything possible in life, and definitely in business. And when we're looking at generative AI and the risks that are associated with it, as well as the innovation. Ross, you're hitting the nail on the head there. And then I like that you pointed out that we will be agentic native in 2026 and even beyond, that's a very interesting perspective. And I think the language around it is really bringing it home, the reality of where we are historically, agentic native. And then that important point where we keep a human in the loop, no layoffs. I love that you said it out loud. And I'm going to say yes and amen to that because I know there are people at home that are saying, please, God, please save our jobs from AI. But you use AI to augment the human and to augment what they're doing. And I love that. So all very, very extraordinary and important points here. And I love you guys tweet agentic native in 2026 and beyond. We're going to salute Ross on that one. I really, really like that point. Dr. Tall Guy, we're going to delve a little bit into what we do when we're looking at emerging frameworks, GenAI security project, LLM and agentic AI, NIST, AI, RMF, and ISO. When we're looking at that, the EU AI Act, how are our leaders deciding what to adopt and how deeply are we adopting that or should be adopting that? Dr. Tallguy, your thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, we should definitely adopt because there's no point reinventing the wheel, right? It's out there for a reason because, it's time, efficiency, effectiveness. So we definitely should use existing what's available. Doesn't matter, it's the standard, the framework. I think it's really context-based. Culture plays a, big role. Industry, right? You mentioned high stakes. What is at stake? We need to define that. Are we a healthcare? Are we higher education, so we need to define what is at stake if we don't do this right. Doing the right things in the right way always, does matter. I think the risk-based adoption is really what should drive this, right? Based on what is at stake, depending on the industry, the cultural elements are important. For example, are you risk averse? You have that kind of a culture, or are you more risk aggressive, right? Depending on the industry. Your strategy drives this. Are you, focused on innovation, growth, right? Differentiation, or maybe cost cutting. So the strategic elements at the highest level, therefore, 5 different major strategies that drive it. So if you're focused on innovation and differentiation, right, you're going to have to take risk. So that's a given. But at the same time, that also defines what type of framework standards or which ones you basically follow. Whether you do business, locally, globally, that also I think is important, right? We have that coverage. In terms of the factors impacting this risk-based adoption, I think is really important to understand is data sensitivity. What type of data are you dealing with? Customer impact, the geography that I mentioned, regulations. What type of regulations are you subject to from a compliance perspective? Because you're in healthcare, because you're in finance. So those are important. The other thing I think that's really important to understand is understand your competencies, capabilities, your skill set, right? Where you are, the maturity. Are you at level 1, level 2, and you're trying to jump to level 4 or 5 without that in between level? You want to do step by step because the foundation is always important. You cannot just skip a level, right? If you're building the first level in a building, you cannot build the fourth, fifth. You have to build the next level, next level. So that's important. So prioritize those controls, prioritize the elements with a focus on scaling up. Maturity comes part of it. I think these tools, standards, frameworks, doesn't matter which one you choose, kind of really allows you to move forward quickly within those guardrails. I often see organizations in different industries using a combination of these, standards or frameworks or best guys practices, right? And there's a reason because every organization is different, their context is different, their pain points are different. Even though it's the same type of organization, same industry with the same, limitations, constrained company A, company B, they are different. Why? They have different people, different cultures, and that also is a big factor. So understand your people, understand your culture, and understand your skill set, competency, capability, and adapt all these different frameworks so that you're not reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, I love that. You hit on a lot there. I like the idea of honoring the culture as you're looking at this, your people, your company, and your competencies. And then you also talked about the customer impact is something that maybe weighed as these things are being looked at, as well as compliance. All very, very, very important. especially that customer impact piece. I'm pretty sure organizations and leaders are looking at that quite possibly at the very top of it. Other than compliance, I would say, would be one of those huge factors. Ross, from your perspective, what are you seeing? What would you say that leaders are doing as they're adopting, how they're honoring these standards, and then how deeply they're integrating them within the organization?
So I think the first thing to maybe split is there's laws and then there's best practices. Laws like what's being passed in California and the EU AI Act, I have to follow if I'm in scope. And best practices are, nice to haves. I don't have to do them, but it's usually a best practice to follow a best practice, right? And so I think that's an important split to figure out which ones you're going to follow and making sure you truly call out those requirements. Now, the other thing that I would say is two pieces on this. The first is it's never been easier to ask AI, hey, are we compliant on these 100 controls on your code? And that can tell you so much so fast. In less than 10 minutes, you can know. And so I think we're not going to ask which control or which standard. We're going to say, am I compliant with all the standards? And then the next thing I really think is the way we've usually done this is we've had an outside auditor, let's call it one of the big four, come and audit us against the standard. And I've always taken issue with this because they do it once a year and my code is changing daily. What's to say that my code is anything like what it was 364 days ago when I last did my certification or my audit? I think that model doesn't work in this world where we write code so fast. I think we need to go and demonstrate continuous control evidence on standards on your code. Show me in your GitHub that your code meets this standard. Prove to me, provide an evidence package that I could see your change in the last 12 hours met all those controls. How do I know you didn't commit illegal code that violates the EU AI Act? We don't do that today, and that's a problem. We need to go more proactive on laws and compliance in our code pipelines, and I think that's a huge opportunity where we can really improve.
Ross, I got chills again. We're gonna have to pause. Everybody just see law, because you touched on several things there. I like that you really differentiated laws from best practices. These are just guidelines. This is just a suggestion. This is how you could do this better versus an actual law, which is something that has to be done by law. And there are, consequences, legal consequences to those. When we look at auditing our code, you mentioned that code is changing daily. How do we ensure that what's happened within the last 24 hours is not a violation? I like the term that you used, continuous control evidence. Continuous control evidence. You guys write that down, tweet it, take it back to your organizations. We need continuous control evidence because, I always like to say our auditors are our friends organizationally. A lot of times we look and, people get panicked when they see them coming or know it's that time, but this is a necessary part of the process. But this continuous control evidence and having an evidence package, Ross, go ahead.
And just imagine, there's companies like Facebook that the EU is absolutely looking for violations for on every day. And imagine if they use Claude or Copilot or any of these tools to write their code, and it optimizes to make it better, but it also makes an illegal code change that doesn't meet GDPR, EU AI Act, or Cyber Resilience Act. That'd be a $50 million fine for a company like that, if not more. So having that focus of continuous control evidence on every code change, so important for highly regulated companies.
Before we Kane, I'd like to mention the geopolitical environment, the priorities, right? US versus EU, maybe China. Our priorities, right, they're different. So what EU focuses on, fundamental human ethical aspects, and maybe we're a tad more focused on innovation, right? Market time to deliver. So there are those differences that we also have to understand, and where those companies based locally makes a difference because of the legal local jurisdictions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that you brought up that point as well. I'm on a double click on that continuous control evidence and an evidence package that Ross is talking about. We need to we need to be looking at that immediately. And Dr. Tallguy, you mentioned the geopolitical aspects of laws and frameworks that are the regulatory frameworks that are set out based on region and what what the priorities are as those are written. And Kane, you're part of an organization, III3 Triple E, that really focused a lot on the EU AI Act and looking at the integration of that, or bringing some best practices as we look at legislation here in the U.S. and globally. Kane, what are your thoughts about this in the light of what Ross has given us, what Dr. Tallguy has double-clicked on here as well? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think I'm going to start with the common ground before I agree to disagree with a few things. I really like that you brought up the idea of classifying by risk, and I want to just make sure that everybody in the audience got that point. Let's say you've got Copilot, and you say, Copilot's neat. We like using Copilot, and we're going to use it for summarizing a meeting like this. That's a fine use case. Should it be then used just the same way to summarize a whole bunch of PHI for your medical clients? Should it summarize some financial data for your financial clients? Should your board meeting minutes come out of Copilot? I think that's where we don't govern at the tool layer. We govern at the use case layer. And that's where we can make those high risk versus low risk decisions. And Ross, I think that I like your idea of having continuous control evidence. Last company I was at, actually, we were looking to do all of that because you're right. If we wait to audit annually, I think that you have a lot of challenges that happen. Now, in terms of things where I've got this might get a bit spicy. Okay, one last thing I'm going to come to you on Ross, on your idea of mapping controls and being able to determine if you are going to comply with all of them. At the very top of this question, you asked us a whole bunch of acronyms: NIST, ISO, EU, AI Act, blah, 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 right? Don't try and comply with all of them all of the time. Figure out where the overlapping areas are, like transparency appears in all three. Risk management shows up in all three. And then we can use things like the EU AI Act as our ceiling for our high-risk systems. And then we can use things like NIST or OWASP. Those are the floor for our technical implementation, because you could go get yourself an ISO 42001 certification, and that'd probably help if you're doing B2B. But I'd say while you do that, maybe prioritize OWASP top 10, because that gives some technical guardrails, like, I don't know, prompt injection testing or tracking your data lineage, that are actually going to prevent breaches while you wait to get an ISO 42001 certification, because there aren't that many auditors out there, right? There's just going to be a delay. So our decision goes from like, hey, can we eventually get a certificate, to, does this control do a thing that matters to us right now? The final thing I'd say, and this is the part that I don't agree on, $50 million to Meta is, they can reach behind the couch cushions and find that. That's in minutes. That is not a penalty. That is just a cost of doing business for a lot of global organizations. And I think a lot of us have used, and this is common with vendors, is use the EU AI Act as fear, or as Colorado as being fearful, right? We just saw Colorado, I guess I'll say they neutered it. They destroyed it. They ruined it. They actually had a really good standard for AI that was intended to prevent consumer harm. And now they said, well, you know what, actually, we'll let people get harmed. And if they get denied a job application or get denied a mortgage, 30 days later, the vendor can tell them why. And then they have a 60-day right to cure. So the company can say, yeah, we'll totally do better next time. And that's unfortunate. Or the EU AI Act, providing the provisional agreement holds, that we'll know in June, in a few days, actually. It's going to be end of December 2027. And they just realized there is no way they can actually enforce this. So I think the companies that are looking at this now have to be fairly thoughtful and say, do we want to have compliance by design? Do we want to avoid the risks of litigation where I can think of an example of a bank that's being sued, a company that's being sued by 74 of its banks because of a downstream vendor reach where AI wasn't involved. We're going to see that kind of outcome if we choose to build systems that are risky. If we choose to build systems that don't have guardrails, we're going to inherit litigation that's going to bring up our cost and probably ruin our cost structure. And for a lot of small companies, a $50 million fine, that is a big deal. For big companies, they've achieved regulatory escape velocity. They don't worry about the fines. GDPR has not put, or Max Schrems has not put various entities out of business. That's not the way reality works. But for the rest of us, we have to choose. Do we want to build ethically? Do we want to build with privacy in mind? Do we want to build with human rights in mind? Or is the surveillance economy okay? Because I'll tell you right now, the surveillance economy is very profitable, right? And that's a decision at a business layer we have to make. And there's not really a right answer here, unfortunately.
One thing you mentioned about the compliance, right? Being non-compliant, we have to remember it's an option as long as we remember the consequences, right? The fees, the fines, and this goes for every organization in every industry. But what we have to understand and really do well is accurately is the risk quantification. Our risk exposure by being non-compliant, right? What is the risk exposure? What's the risk remediation? For a risk exposure, tangible, intangible, if we quantify the risk properly, for let's say $1 million risk exposure, the company's not going to spend, let's say, $2 million for the remediation. So I think at the end of the day, that's why the GRC is, I'm so much on fundamentals, right? It's important. If you do the risk properly, quantification, and if you, and that's really what the board understands, right? It's all about the numbers at the end of the day. So if you can create that structure properly, business is all about creating value, and we all have limited resources. I mentioned we're trying to optimize. So if we address that properly, all these things we're talking will become much easier to manage for decision-making purposes.
Yeah. Wow, you guys have really you've really hammered home some really good points here. I've got to say the regulatory risk velocity for large tech companies and larger institutions. Okay, that's a very interesting statement. And then as we're looking at inherited litigation, when we're looking at risks and how we choose to implement, AI governance, laws and best practices, as well as our compliance. And I love that you mentioned that point, compliance by design. All great points. Gentlemen, we are out of time. This has been a wonderful, very insightful, robust conversation. I know our audience has so much that they can take back to their teams. I know that they'll have questions for you. You guys can reach out to us in the chat for our real-time live chat throughout the day. This has been absolutely amazing. I want to thank you all for being here, for sharing your insights, for what you've done before in your careers that have brought you to this moment, for how you're sharing with us, and for everything that you are doing in this very moment to save the world. You guys are gentlemen after my own heart. I really do appreciate it. I want to give a shout out to the Cyber Risk Alliance and the official Cybersecurity Summit. You all know I love you, and nobody does it better. Nobody does it better. Well, you all stay tuned. Get your water, get your pens. There is more happening here at the official Cybersecurity Summit. We've got other panels. We've got other information that's coming forward and other experts that are here. And also be sure to jump into our vendor space. There are solutions there for you as well. Don't go anywhere. There's more to come at the official Cybersecurity Summit.